Thank you, Chairman, and thank you again to our contributors and for those who have come back from previous groupings. I know we're to speak to Meat Industry Ireland later on today as well. Just with respect to SIP2 and to what you said there, Ms King, and I would agree with you in part to what you're talking about, the very high turnover of companies, but I would point out to you that turnover is vanity. At the end of the day, you have a high capital cost in this marketplace, so I think it's important to note exactly where profits are, but there's no doubt that there is a small amount of players in the market and they do control the market very much. But I was listening to the president of ICSA was on television yesterday, and he was talking about the poor price that was being paid to farmers for their produce, and farmers having to operate below cost at the moment. So this is the cost model that we are operating in, that the business is operating in. And I would say, first and foremost, has SIP2 ever looked at trying to go to government and speak about the below cost selling of meat, which is ultimately a big component in this whole problem? I worked in the meat industry 30 years ago. At that time, we were selling meat at a higher price per kg cuts of meat than we are selling today, 30 years later. So, and the below-cost selling of meat and the loss leading of meat being used in the convenience sector is a large proportion of the Irish price. And then in the European context, we are selling into a European, as you know, 90% of our exports in meat are being sold into a European market, and we are subject to the pricing conventions within that. So maybe if you have anything to...
Deputy, thank you for the question. The answer I would give to that is that, we're on public record since April in looking for this Farm to Fork task force, and I really meant those words at the time. From the very start of the process, from the animal and the farm getting to the process, to the abattoir, and right to the market, that is the microscope that needs to be shone on this industry. I take your point, turnover is one thing and profit is another, but there is significant profits being made on the sweat of workers' backs, who in many cases, particularly in the white meat industry, are getting €10.10 an hour with no sick pay, no pension provision, and basic leave entitlement. That is what's happening. It's the same in the red meat. It's the same in the pork. There is different areas with different rates because of skill sets and so on. But in the main, you're looking at workers getting €12–13 an hour, including their piece rate on top of that. Like it is immeasurable as to, like, we've seen a situation recently with regard to SEOs, and I do believe that the government may be appealing that High Court judgment, and I wish them every well with it, because at the end of the day, that's what I believe it'll take to sort this out. And as part of that process, we need to bring in all of the participants in the meat processing industry, not just the processors, yes, the farmers, yes, the workers, and yes, the consumers, to bring about a solution that works for everyone moving forward, because COVID is going to be with us, and that's what we're here to talk about. Some of the experts are saying we'll have it for a decade or further. Meat is going to be with us. We have got one shot at this, and we've got to fix it.
Well, Mr. Ennis, could I say, and by the way, I wasn't being anyway...
Sorry, if I may, Deputy, I have a very relevant example in terms of profits, what you were asking about. So to give you the example of a poultry plant, which is unionized with our union, this poultry plant processes 45,000 chickens a day with 90 staff on the production floor. So we have calculated that actually if every member of staff got an increase in pay of €1 an hour, this would only affect the price per chicken by 8 cents. So this would probably still keep these chickens competitive, and the profits are at an all-time high. Production never stopped. It actually increased during the pandemic. And actually, all these workers are agency workers, and the agency is getting €15 an hour for each worker, but the workers are only getting 10. And the head supervisor in this factory, who has been there 13 years, is getting €12 an hour with no premium.
A couple of questions in, if I may, sorry. And I agree with you about the pay of workers, and I think you have highlighted there one of the key issues in this industry sector, which is the issue of agencies. And it's a question again whether the unions themselves have looked to try and offer some other alternative to the agency structure for hiring of foreign workers and migrant workers here. Because I think the meat factories are not in a position themselves to get into hiring and looking at recruitment on that basis. That's why they look to agents. And surely you've just highlighted that agents are not passing on the overtime, that agents are crowding people into houses, which is absolutely tantamount to delivering infection across the country. And this is something that needs to be looked at. And I would like to know, what are the unions doing in terms of trying to voice that?
Deputy, may I just respond to that? Number one, there's a piece of legislation in the country which arises as a result of a European directive in relation to temporary agency workers. And that goes back to 2012, and that legislation is now in place. And what it sets out is that an agency worker should not be treated any less favourably than their counterparts who are directly employed. So that's number one. What you are seeing is, you are seeing this being bypassed by some employers by virtue of constructing this self-employed company they're putting in place. So they're constructing a way around this. Now, some do it in aviation, they do it in a very sophisticated way. I gather in this case it's not that sophisticated, but the home employer is actually in Poland, not in Ireland at all. And that obviously leads to a situation where, when a situation like we're now dealing with happens, those workers who are fictitiously or bogusly self-employed, they end up with having no entitlements for anything. So the people who lose out are those workers. What have we done about it? Well, now, you don't have all day, and neither do I, to tell you how much I have hawked myself around every government department, every minister, to try and get this issue of bogus self-employment dealt with. And not one of them. The revenue commissioners uphold the scenario by virtue of the rules that revenue have. Those rules at the moment uphold a situation that somebody can be declared as self-employed by the employer, and that's acceptable. So unless we get to a place where you're not regarded as self-employed until you put forward the evidence as being non-bogusly self-employed, then we won't deal with this. So I can tell you again, we have hawked ourselves around the place to anybody who'd listen to us to take on this argument. I went to the Chairman of the Revenue Commissioners myself. I had a conversation with him. I've been to the Minister for Finance. Every pre-budget submission we make, we put in the issue of dealing with bogus self-employment, and we have made very little headway. We did have a situation, to be fair, where Deputy O'D...
Sorry, I am loath to cut.
Yeah, okay.
But I just have to make time for other speakers. Thank you. And